Right. Hi. How is everybody? I hope everybody's well. Thanks for joining us this evening. We're really excited to have everybody here. I know we're right at 5 o'clock, or on the West Coast anyway. So we're going to go ahead and jump in. I'll introduce myself real quickly. My name's Andrew Rhinehart. Andy, please. I'm the Chief Medical Officer and Chief Scientific and Medical Officer, excuse me, and CEO here at the Sansum Diabetes Research Institute. And I'll be moderating this evening with this wonderful group of folks. And I want to thank American Diabetes Association and Breakthrough T1D for joining us at Sansum Diabetes Research to put this on tonight. So, and just a quick reminder and disclaimer, just the fact that we're not providing direct medical advice to anybody. Please check with your providers related to that. But this is a really important topic as we get ready to go back to school here just around the corner for lots of folks. So with no further ado, let's let our esteemed colleagues here introduce themselves. So I'll go through, I'm going to go alphabetically here real quickly. So Rebecca Allen, please, can you
Sure.
introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm the Diabetes Education and Technology Manager for a hospital-based pediatric diabetes clinic with OU Health in Oklahoma City. My background is in nutrition, diabetes education, and advanced diabetes management. And I've spent the last 18 years supporting clinical care research and education needs, and that includes insulin pumps, continuous glucose monitors, and other diabetes technology for our patients. I've also been involved with ADA Safe at School program since 2011 and currently serve on ADA Safe at School working group. So it's a pleasure to be here today.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. And Dr. Elchuri.
Hi, I'm Swati Elchuri. I'm a pediatric endocrinologist and the director of pediatric endocrinology for a county health system here in Southern California. I also have the pleasure of working with Dr. Rhinehart at the Sansum Diabetes Research Institute and serve as the clinical director of our screen and support program for type 1 diabetes. So I work very intimately with families that have type 1 and type 2 diabetes, and it's an honor to be here tonight. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you. And Jackie, please go right ahead.
Thanks, Andy. I'm Jackie McManemin. I'm a registered nurse and certified diabetes care and education specialist. I currently work as a nurse manager with the Fairfax County Health Department, and we provide school health services to students in Fairfax County Public Schools. We're a very large school district. And I also used to work in a busy pediatric endocrinology clinic providing diabetes education to mostly children with type 1 diabetes, but also type 2 diabetes. And I also volunteer alongside Rebecca with the ADA Safe at School working group, and I also volunteer with the Virginia Diabetes Council School Committee, where I am chair. So excited to be here.
Okay, well, great. And Dr. McManus.
Good evening. So I'm a registered dietitian and assistant professor at Case Western Reserve University and the Cleveland Clinic. I actually was diagnosed with type 1 when I was 6 years old, so I really understand so many of the challenges that you may be going through, which is why my research and all of my work really focuses on developing family-based programs for families with a child with type 1. I also serve on several national committees for the American Diabetes Association and Breakthrough T1D to really advocate for individuals living with diabetes. So I'm really excited and appreciative to be a part of this really important discussion.
All right. And no further ado, Crystal, do you mind
Good evening,
yourself?
everybody. Good evening. Thank you, Dr. Rhinehart. I'm Crystal Woodward. I'm Vice President of the American Diabetes Association's Legal Advocacy Division. This is the association's anti-discrimination effort, which encompasses Safe at School, which is what we're going to be talking about tonight. I helped to launch Safe at School almost 3 decades ago. So I've been with the association for a long time. I also understand the angst that parents sometimes are faced with in sending their children with diabetes back to school. I have a now 36-year-old daughter with type 1 diabetes. who was diagnosed when she was just a year old. So we've been doing this diabetes dance for a long time. So I understand the concerns. And so actually, I've been involved with the association since 1991 and came on staff about 8 years later. I lead the Safe at School working group at the American Diabetes Association. And I can't tell you just how wonderful it is to have Jackie and Rebecca and the others as part of that group. I'm really pleased to be here tonight. So thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And again, thank you all for being here. And let's go ahead and get started. So we're going to jump right back at it, Crystal. So legal rights and protections. Let's start there. So what is a Section 504 plan? Help us there. What's included? And why is it so important for students with diabetes to have a 504 plan in place?
Great question. So the term 504 plan refers to a plan developed by the 504 team that usually includes a school nurse, a school administrator, guidance counselors, teachers, parents, guardians, and sometimes the student, and other stakeholders who are familiar with the student. The 504 considers eligibility of the individual student for services under the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, commonly known as Section 504. So for students with diabetes who are eligible for services under Section 504, the 504 plan is developed by the team, and the plan sets out actions the school will take to make sure the student with diabetes is medically safe, not just during the school day, but also during extracurricular activities, field trips, the lunchroom, anywhere that the school holds school-sponsored events, even school dances and drama club and after-school activities. But the idea behind the 504 plan is to set out the actions the school is going to take to make sure the child is medically safe and to make sure that the care and the accommodations provided align with the individual student's diabetes medical management plan or provider's orders. The plan also ensures that children with diabetes will have the same educational access, the same access to all school-sponsored activities as their peers, and ensures that they are treated fairly. The plan is really a tool that can be used to make sure that students, parents, guardians, and the school staff understand their respective responsibilities and to minimize misunderstandings. Each plan is individualized to a specific student according to their needs, abilities, level of independence, medical condition. It's important to only include the provisions that are specific to that child, so there's really no one-size-fits-all plan. For example, a section on self-management probably would not be included in a kindergartner's plan, but the ability to have access to a cell phone or smart device to manage blood glucose levels during an exam is critical for middle and high school students.
Wow. Sounds incredibly important. So when should somebody submit this? And then after it's submitted, are you gonna then set a time to sit down and meet with any administrator,
Sure.
teacher, or school nurse or anything to go over
Sure.
this one-on-one?
Another great question. So just to back up a little bit about the process, it all starts with the diabetes medical management plan that is developed by the student's diabetes provider, developed and approved. And that plan should be submitted to the school nurse or school healthcare provider and reviewed with the parent and the provider before the beginning of the school year. And then we know that's a hectic time of year for school nurses. But ideally, before the first day of school, the school nurse is sitting down with the parent and going through the DMMP. Or for the newly diagnosed student, the DMMP should be developed and submitted before the student returns to school after diagnosis. So just keep in mind the 504 plan it's a consensus document, right? The team determines what's going to be included in the plan. And there is a process involved where the team gathers. So first a request is made, the 504 team gathers, determines eligibility, because it might be that the child qualifies for an individualized education program under another law called IDEA, or Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. So it's the team's job to determine eligibility, write the plan, and ideally that plan, the 504 plan is what I'm referring to, would be developed before the end of the school year for the next school year, so that all that is necessary before the beginning of the next school year is for it to be tweaked and updated. So unfortunately, the 504 regulations are not specific as to timelines. There's a lot of reasonable timelines that are referenced, but there's no dead set legal timeline. So just within a reasonable time, I tell parents, put everything in writing. When you request that 504 process, when you put that in place, put it in writing. The team should come together quickly, I'd say within a week to 10 days, determine eligibility, get the plan written. I'll just share one quick thing. I know the first time I did a 504 plan for my daughter, it took me 6 months to get that plan together. So there's a lot of negotiation, and we all just want to do what's best for that child and to provide the support needed for that child in order for the child to be successful, healthy, safe, and have access to all school-sponsored events.
All right. Well, great. Well, thank you. That's
You're welcome.
Incredibly important information. Dr. Elchuri, how are you?
Good, thank you. And yourself?
Yeah, good. So what are some tips? Give us some best and practical tips to keep in mind while you're implementing this plan for your students for return to school for the first time since being diagnosed.
So I think a lot of this is going to piggyback off of what Crystal said, but the diabetes medical management plan is just part of this 504. So the 504 is more of like a global protection, let's say, for the child when they're at school. And it really is to ensure their safety while allowing them to participate fully and confidently in all school activities. And so it's really important to remember, as Crystal mentioned, that there is no 504 plan that will be the same. So the most successful 504 plans are ones that are individualized, practical, and developed collaboratively between the student, the family, and the school personnel. And this is before, again, the student returns to school. And it's important that all involved school personnel understand the diabetes management plan, including how to monitor blood glucose levels, how to administer insulin, when to check for ketones, how to treat hypo and hyperglycemia, where the diabetes supplies are and where they're going to be kept. They also understand when the student should have access to snacks, to water, to use the restroom, and special accommodations for exams, physical activity, and field trips. So clear communication is really critical between the family, the diabetes care team, and the school staff. And it's very important to remember, too, that this should be regularly reviewed, right, as the child's needs evolve. This is not something that is set in stone at the beginning of the year and stays that way. So that's something to just keep in mind. And I would recommend all families to plan ahead, as Crystal mentioned, to individualize these accommodations, educate school staff, and maintain clear communication consistently between the family, the school, and the diabetes care team.
Wow. It's a lot. This sounds overwhelming. I'm looking at some of the questions too, and it looks like there's some overwhelmed parents, and hopefully we can get to all those as well. But just a quick follow-up question. I can imagine you get bombarded in the summer for lots of requests. What's the best way for you to work with your patients and their families to be able to collaboratively make sure this all works and get things submitted on time?
I encourage families to communicate with the school, as you had mentioned, at the end of the school year, if possible, for all our families that are that have been diagnosed that are continuing on in the same school system for the following year. And then for those diabetes medical management plans or those school forms, strongly, strongly encourage families to give them to the medical provider at the beginning of summer or as early as possible in order to allow an appropriate turnaround time, which for some clinics can take 2 to 3 weeks. Oftentimes, just in my practice, we're getting a bombardment of school forms right before, like the 2 weeks before school starts. And it's very hard for us to turn that over and get it in time. So the earlier and more prepared you are, the more it benefits us. And then the more we can even have conversations, even during the summer as things continue to change.
Okay. So not a bad idea to literally start this process the second the last school year ends.
Yes.
Okay. Kind of a continuous process. Crystal, a quick follow-up for you. What are the steps for working with school personnel that are somewhat resistant to including essential information in a 504?
Sure, that does happen. So as I said before, the 504 plan provides important protections for students with diabetes. It prevents misunderstandings, ensures students receive needed care and services, and they're treated fairly. And the ultimate goal of the plan, other than keeping the kids safe and enabling them to access the environment, is eventually to transition the children to independent self-management, right? So we always have that in mind. The ADA has a mantra of educate, negotiate, litigate, legislate, and we really live by that mantra. Most of the resistance we hear about from school isn't because the school is being malicious or trying to give the parent or a child a hard time. It's because of lack of knowledge, right? So I go back to that educate tenet in our mantra. And lots of times that's all that's needed is a little bit of education about diabetes from the parent, a little education about the school's legal obligations under federal and many state laws to provide appropriate care. And I think this is where the effort really needs to be focused. It's upon education. Also, parents or guardians should be prepared, to ask for specific accommodations that will enhance the student's health and safety, and to have an understanding of what is it you're asking for. Be clear. And if the school objects, understand the reasons for the school's objection. Again, a lot of times that's just lack of knowledge and fear. There's a lot of fear of diabetes, that something's going to go wrong. I mean, back in the day when we were just doing injections and doing finger pricks, you could see the sharp. The sharp was visible, and there were a lot of fear about sharp. So we need to calm that down. Many times it's really helpful if the student's diabetes provider will be available to offer suggestions and input as to what the needed accommodations and services are. It's, and again, not just during the school day, but during extracurricular events. And I always advise parents, ask for the universe, but expect the world. And there will more than likely be some negotiating going back and forth with this 504 plan. And finally, as I previously stated, put everything in writing. When the parent is requesting that the 504 process be initiated, put it in writing to an email. If it's not written, it was never said. So put it in writing. The objections, the concerns, everything. Just document.
And Chris, real quickly, I saw a question in the chat, and one is private schools. Do these 504, is this a law for them as well?
Yes, so private schools receiving federal funds, and that includes religious or schools operated by religious entities. Those schools have legal obligations under Section 504, and a 504 plan can be developed. For those private schools not receiving federal funding, they still have obligations under the Americans with Disabilities Act. So my recommendation is we might not call it a 504 plan, but my recommendation is for a written accommodations plan to still be put in place, which is essentially the same as 504. It's just under a different law. And while we're on that topic, let me just quickly say, for students who attend religious-based schools that receive federal funding, those kids have protections under 504, and a 504 plan can be developed. However, for schools, religious schools not receiving federal funding, there are no legal obligations for those schools to provide services, but often those schools have a published anti-discrimination policy, and that's usually what I point the parents toward. Yeah.
Okay. All right. We're going to move forward here. So let's talk about some emotional and psychological support for students. So Jackie, this one's for you. That's okay. What is a diabetes medical management plan? I know we've referenced it a little bit already. And how is this plan used at a school to provide diabetes care?
Thanks, Dr. Rhinehart. I think this is really important to define at this point for sure what that DMMP is. So a diabetes medical management plan, or DMMP, is a set of medical orders that's completed by the student's medical diabetes healthcare provider. It outlines the student's individualized diabetes care needs while they're in school and while they're participating in any school-sponsored activities. The DMMP includes information such as, glucose monitoring, when the glucose is going to be monitored, how it's going to be monitored, insulin dosing, treatment for high and low glucose, ketone management, meals and snacks, activity considerations, and emergency procedures. And because the DMMP is so individualized, every student's DMMP is going to look a little bit different. And to support that consistency and to make sure that schools receive that comprehensive medical plan, the American Diabetes Association has developed a DMMP that is posted on their website that we can access. And I'm hoping maybe we can drop that website into the chat for the participants, the ADA Safe at School website with the DMMP link. But for schools, what the DMMP is it serves as that clinical foundation for diabetes care. It's what we're going to do. It's how the school nurse is going to take care of that student during the school day. And we take those individualized orders and then develop the student's healthcare plan. And that healthcare plan helps, again, further outline how we're going to treat that low blood sugar, how we're going to treat that high blood sugar. And also the DMMP helps us outline what training we're going to need to do during the school day. It helps ensure that students can participate in every aspect of their day, including not only in the classroom, but also when they're going on field trips, when they're participating in extracurricular after-school activities, and if they're participating in any kind of sports too. The best way to look at the DMMP is as a collaborative tool. It's a tool that works best when the healthcare providers, the families, and the school communicate regularly and keep these orders up to date, and share the information as it changes so that we can make sure we have, the best set of orders to care for that student during the school day.
Yeah, and that's important. Insulin doses change, things change, therapies change. Do you have any tricks of the trade of how to make sure that it's kept up to date throughout the year as things do change?
Yeah, that's a really good question. One of the things that ADA DMMP offers is a one-page on the insulin dosing page. It can act as a standalone order. So all the doctor would have to do is complete that one pager each time the student comes in for their routine visits. Another trick of the trade for this, I think, is just talking to the school nurse, how best to communicate these changes. I am gonna mention a little later on about, where parents can actually make changes to the orders. The doctors give the parents permission to do that, and that provides a lot of flexibility too. One thing I did see come up in the chat is if people need to provide a new DMMP every single school year. And yes, they do. It's a medical order. So with all medical orders, they're only good for 1 year. So each school year, a new set of orders has to be completed.
Okay, really important. Thank you.
Mhm.
I'm glad you saw that question. Um, Dr. Elchuri, I got one for you. As we all know, unfortunately, teens and other children can sometimes be a little embarrassed, resistant with their devices, etc. How can families support kids while they're protecting their health and helping them adjust, with this diagnosis and with these devices?
This is a really good question because I do see this often in clinic, especially in a lot of my teenage patients. And feeling self-conscious about diabetes devices at school is very common, especially after a new diagnosis. And so I think families can really help by acknowledging those feelings, validating the feelings, involving the child in decisions about how and when to manage their diabetes, and practicing responses to questions from peers. So oftentimes in clinic, I'll pose questions to some of my patients and say, like, how would you respond to this? And just think about how you would process this so that you have something and you feel better prepared for what people might say to you. And I think very importantly also is connecting with peers that also have type 1 diabetes. And this can be done through local support groups or through camps. I'm the chief medical advisor for a diabetes education and peer support group here in Southern California. And we really try to focus on hosting events for different age groups so that we can get a lot of kids together that can talk about their diabetes care and ask questions to each other that they can't ask their providers, nor do they want to ask their parents. So I think that's a very important forum in which these kids can then connect as also with camp. And this can help normalize the experience. And at the same time, I think it's also really important to reinforce that devices like continuous glucose monitors and insulin pumps are essential tools for staying healthy and participating safely in school. So the goal really is to build confidence, but this is going to happen over time. It's not going to happen overnight.
Yeah. Maybe a larger societal question is not even stigma just for children at school, but what about society overall? How do we decrease stigma of diabetes?
Yeah.
Period.
I mean, that's a really good question. And this is like a continual question that we're constantly addressing, right? And if I had to break it down, really, I think it boils down to really promoting awareness and education of type 1 diabetes. And this is for parents to come into the school to provide education, even for the clinic staff to come in, or even for the school staff to provide education to the students, just about what is type 1 diabetes, and to also expel the myth that you get type 1 diabetes because you ate too much sugar. Like, this is to educate patients or students and tell them that this is something that that these kids have, that they're dealing with, and it does not make them any different from their peers that do not have type 1 diabetes. And in fact, it actually makes these students more resilient, and that they actually learn to make very difficult decisions on a daily basis. And so you're really focusing on the strengths and highlighting those. So I really think it comes down to education.
Great, thank you. Jackie, how about we go back to you? And we alluded to this a little bit earlier, but should parents be permitted to make insulin dose changes during the school day? For somebody has an issue calling in and making a quick dose change. And why is this important for parents to provide this kind of input? And how can the DMP ensure that we're able to make those types of changes on the fly?
Yeah, this is very important because we know and understand that the diabetes needs of a child are changing constantly. I think one of the strengths of ADA's DMMP is that there is a section that references parent adjustments that can be made during school. And we know that insulin doses do sometimes need to change, whether it's because the child's needs are changing, maybe the student is more active, he's doing soccer after school every day, whatever the situation is that has changed. The DMMP, the ADA DMMP recognizes that asking for a whole new set of medical orders for every dose change is not realistic. And so that's why this section allows for that. And so what happens is the healthcare provider authorizes the parent to make adjustments within a certain range, whether it's increasing or decreasing the total insulin dose, whether it's upping the insulin to carb ratio, whether it's changing the insulin sensitivity or correction factor. All of that is included on the DMMP. And then again, this allows those real-time adjustments to happen if needed. And I think one of the important steps is that in this is we have to give parents a way to communicate that. And I think for many parents, they're working, they're busy. And so the parent and the school nurse or the school health provider in the health room should set aside some time to meet with a parent to kind of talk through how these kind of doses should be communicated. And I think, email might work well for a parent. There might be text messaging platforms that the school uses. That might be a really great way of communicating those type of changes. So I think it's really the key is making it work is communicating. So families should immediately notify the school nurse if something changes, and then the school nurse should kind of have a process for documenting those changes and ensuring that everyone involved in the student's care is aware that, for example, the insulin to carb ratio has changed. So it's the nurse's, responsibility for making sure that's communicated to all those caring for the student.
What I keep hearing from many of you is you need to be locked arms, lockstep with the school nurse and really have a great relationship and collaborative. So that leads to some practical tips for families, caregivers, staff, nutrition. And Jackie, I'll just go back to you again. How do you train or recommend? What do you recommend we do with the school staff? What about a coach that's never heard of diabetes or uh, teacher's aide, etc.? Are you providing education, or what are you doing? What do you recommend?
Yeah, I think this is also a very important concept for us is how do you train those who are supporting the student? So I think when we think about training school staff, what we want to consider is we make sure that we're training the right people to have the right level of knowledge and skills. And it's really based on their role or how they're interacting with the student. A really nice resource that the American Diabetes has put together is kind of a three-tiered approach. So there's three levels to training. Level one is general diabetes awareness training. And this training is for everyone in the school. And so what we recommend within our school district is if a student with diabetes attends that school, every single person in the building watches this training. Okay. And so that includes your teachers, your administrators, your office staff, your bus drivers, your coaches, and other school personnel who interact with that student. The goal of that training is for everyone to understand what type 1 diabetes is, be able to recognize those signs and symptoms for lows and highs, and understand that students need access to their supplies no matter where they are, access to food, access to water, access to bathroom breaks, and that those individuals who are level 1 trained know how to get in touch with someone who can help the student if they're in trouble or if they're in an emergency situation. So those folks should be able to recognize what an emergency for diabetes looks like. So then you get to the level 2 trained staff, and this is more student specific. So again, level 1 was looking at more of an awareness. Level 2 is more looking at that student's individualized DMMP and then their healthcare plans. And so this includes your classroom teachers, your instructional assistants, your coaches, or other staff who have that more direct role with the student during the school day. And like I said, it's based on the DMMP and should focus on the student's individual needs, how this student's lows look, how to recognize if this student is having a low, how to respond if their CGM is alarming, how to provide any of those appropriate supports during school and after school activities. And then your level 3 staff is going to be your most highly trained staff. These are your staff who are going to be trained in the administration of insulin and glucagon, okay? And so those are the staff who are going to assist in the event that the school nurse isn't there. Those are the staff who are going to step in, or those are the staff who are going to go with the student on a field trip, for example, when they're off campus. right? The school nurse can't necessarily hop in the car and go on the field trip with them. And so these individuals are so highly trained that they can kind of step in and provide that support. In our state, as a part of our Nurse Practice Act is we can delegate the administration of insulin and glucagon. So that is very state specific. But that we can do that. And so I think that those levels of training really help kind of understand what training is needed. And as a school nurse, the school nurse's role is to work with the administrator at the school and identify who needs to be trained and at what level they need to be trained to support those students in school. The idea isn't that every single, staff member is an expert in diabetes care, but rather that we have a network of support for that student where staff have basic awareness, and while those who are working more closely can recognize those individual needs. And maybe, Allie, we can pop that ADA's Helping This Student with Diabetes Succeed, a guide for school personnel that really helps define those level of trainings even better than I just did.
Oh, Jackie, what about students? We talked earlier about stigma. Would it help to educate students as well, maybe even at level 1?
Absolutely. I think that this is very individual, though, and it really depends on the child. Some students don't want other people, I think Dr. Elchuri kind of hinted at this, don't want other people knowing that they have diabetes. And so that can be kind of a slippery slope when you're talking about your older students. But certainly, if the student feels comfortable, the nurse or even the student can provide a little in-service to their class about diabetes. We are trying to provide more type 1 diabetes awareness on our school websites, offering, more information about type 1 screening. So I think students can certainly be a part of the conversation, depending on, what their comfort level is with that.
Okay, great. All right, I'm going there. You ready? School lunch. Dr. McManus, can you help us? What are some tips with food at school?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when it comes to food, really one of the biggest challenges with school is that no 2 days are exactly the same. And I'm
Oh, I
sure.
thought you were going to say the food's so good. No, I'm sorry.
I love that. But it's such a challenge between field trips and assemblies and parties. These all can affect both when and what your child eats and how their blood sugar then responds. So that's really why I feel flexibility is one of the most important nutrition skills for youth with type 1 to really learn. And as parents, you can help your child and really guide them in learning to be more adaptable with their diabetes management and really taking a lead role in that by helping them really be what I like to call be prepared for the unexpected. As a parent, and trying to encourage that independence at school, make sure that they always have an extra snack available. Assure that your child knows where those fast-acting glucose foods and sources are being kept at school. And also, and I think really importantly, make sure that they have a trusted adult who they feel comfortable, who they can go to if, and I shouldn't say if, I should say when plans change and they're feeling a little uncomfortable with the situation, or how their blood sugar might be trending. So I think that's really important, having that trusted adult. I also feel that it's really helpful as a parent. You can sit down and talk with them and kind of talk through what if scenarios at home. So, for example, what if their lunch is delayed? What if there's an unexpected treat at school because of a birthday party, or a teacher brings in donuts all of a sudden? So walking through these what if scenarios, like this might happen, it really helps them already in their head kind of know how to respond to these before they even happen, which can help them better manage their diabetes and also build that confidence in taking a lead role in their diabetes management. Another tip that I would say is when it comes to school lunches Keep them simple and keep them familiar. Pack foods that you know your kid enjoys and you know that they're going to eat, and also that they have already had experience doing carb counting with and dosing their insulin for. Really, school is not typically the best place to try to experiment with new foods, because when your child is independently managing their blood sugar, we really, if possible, want to try to minimize those unknowns, to really help, again, not throw any curveballs at them when they're already trying to manage the diabetes independently, or at least with the school staff.
Okay, that's helpful. But the other big thing is just, we talk about food all the time with diabetes, and how do you encourage that just a healthy relationship with food, but also talking about the carb counting and glucose management, and we talk often about eating disorders, etc., and we really want to prevent that. So, Dr. McManus, what do you recommend there?
I absolutely love that you asked this question. And just like you said, like eating disorders and even disordered eating, which is not as severe as eating disorders, they are significantly higher among youth with type 1 compared to the general youth population. Um, and and when we think about kids with type 1, typically they have to think about food so much more and in a very different way than their peers. So yes, while carb counting and glycemic control are all really important, I also feel that it is so important for our kiddos with type 1 to enjoy food and feel confident around it, because oftentimes we see that youth with type 1, when it comes to food, they often become actually like fearful and frustrated. So, one thing that you can do as a parent of a child with type 1 is really try to help them develop and maintain a healthy relationship with food by involving them in food planning as well as preparation. So, involve them in this process. Have them help you with choosing meals. Bring them to the grocery store and have them help you pick out new foods. Involve them in cooking. There's so many different age appropriate ways that you can involve a child, whether they're 3 or 4 years old or they're a teenager. Also, sitting down and really doing that carb counting together can help them develop nutrition skills, confidence, and hopefully develop that healthy relationship with food. Something that I like to do with my own kids actually is give them choices with meals, but keep them within healthy boundaries, so they don't veer off the road too much. So, for example, let's say you're packing your child's lunch for school. One thing that you could say to them is, okay, for your school lunch tomorrow, would you rather have cucumber slices or bell pepper strips for your low carb veggie in your school lunch? And by doing this, you're not leaving the decision making completely open-ended, and up to them, because let's be honest, if you let them choose their meals, they probably say pizza, mac and cheese. They wouldn't be necessarily very nutritious. But by really engaging them within those boundaries, you're having them kind of be involved in food in a healthful way rather than not involving them all. And we have seen that when you do involve kids in food prep, not only can it help build a healthier relationship, but also they're much more likely to eat those foods.
That's helpful. Thank you. What about just managing glucoses, but also optimizing growth and development, and this challenge I keep hearing from all of you: keep your knees bent. Every day is different and things change. So how do we do all this with challenging school schedules?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. It's definitely a balancing act. And I think the first thing I encourage parents to do is really try to prioritize breakfast. From kind of an academic standpoint, breakfast helps fuel learning, concentration, and then just from an overall child well-being standpoint, it is so important to help us fuel growth. But for kiddos with type 1, it can be an especially challenging meal. Breakfast, really for two reasons. First off, is that we tend to see insulin resistance being heightened and much higher in the morning. So it can make it more challenging to manage our blood sugar levels. And then secondly, when we think about typical breakfast foods here in the US, they tend to be extremely, extremely carb heavy, and especially have a high content of those refined carbs, which cause our blood sugars to spike quite rapidly. So, a great way to help your child really have steadier blood sugars throughout the day and sustained energy is trying to encourage them and when you're planning meals to really avoid eating what I like to call naked carbs, and trying to avoid those naked carbs at breakfast. And what I mean by naked carbs is that try to pair our carb containing foods with a source of protein, dietary fiber, and or healthy fats. Because by doing this pairing and not eating those carb foods alone, we can actually avoid those dramatic spikes in your child's blood sugar after eating. So let's say rather than offering your child a plain bagel, let's say they just love plain bagels, maybe still allow them to have some of that plain bagel, offer half of that plain bagel, but then also offer them maybe half of a banana with some peanut butter on it, as that banana and peanut butter will provide that dietary fiber. It'll provide the healthy fats and the protein to help kind of better manage the rise in blood sugar that we see coming from that bagel. And this concept of really avoiding naked carbs extends beyond just breakfast to lunch, to dinner, and even to our snacks as well. So I know with type 1 diabetes, we often get very focused on carbs, and that tends to be our primary focus with meals and snacks. But try to start thinking about more or less like building balanced meals and snacks by pairing those carb-containing foods with food sources of protein and healthy fats and dietary fiber as well.
Yeah, thanks for that one example. Do you have another example of a nice breakfast that someone could do?
That someone could do, absolutely. So I know I said that like breakfast can be a very challenging meal because there are so much of the American diet. Breakfast is so carb heavy, whether it's pancakes, cereal, oatmeal. So something that is very commonly done in the US is eating breakfast for dinner. I can attest to this. My kiddos love when we serve pancakes and eggs and sausage for dinner. But have you ever thought about taking this approach and flipping it? So having dinner for breakfast. And the reason that I suggest this is because here in the US, typically our dinners tend to be a little bit more well balanced across our three macronutrients, across carbs and fats and protein, which can help to minimize those rapid spikes in our blood sugar after eating. So my one kiddo actually just doesn't like traditional breakfast food. So we do dinner for breakfast at home quite regularly. We will make grilled cheese. We make quesadillas. We'll do meatballs on a skewer, a turkey sandwich, and even honestly, a good old peanut butter and jelly can be some alternatives where they have a little bit more of that well-balanced composition with regards to our macronutrients rather than being so carb heavy.
Okay, well, thank you. All right, let's go to sports, athletics. Let's talk legal first. So, Crystal, I'm going to call you out to help us out here. So, what legal protections are available to be sure that our student athletes with diabetes are able to fully participate?
Sure. Student athletes with diabetes should be free from discrimination and preconceived judgments on how their diabetes might affect their athletic abilities. We know that people with diabetes play sports. They can safely play sports and participate while managing their diabetes in accordance with their healthcare team's recommendations. Unfortunately, students with diabetes continue to experience discrimination in sports settings, often stemming from stigma and conscious and unconscious bias. And some examples of discrimination against student athletes include being excluded from competitions or tryouts due to misconceptions about their health or their abilities. Some students are discouraged from participating in certain sports because of safety concerns that are not evidence-based. Sometimes students are prohibited from wearing their pumps and CGMs while playing sports. Also, students face penalties. Sometimes they're disciplined for taking short breaks to manage their diabetes, such as checking their BGs, administering insulin, grabbing a snack to treat a low. We find sometimes coaches and staff question the student athlete's toughness, their commitment, their reliability, their insensitive comments that are made, and their jokes about their diabetes. Just know that the schools and sports teams and sporting associations may be subject to federal anti-discrimination laws that we've already talked about. And also some states have specific laws that prohibit this type of discrimination. Reasonable accommodations for the student athlete with diabetes include extra time to monitor BGs, being permitted to administer insulin or other medication, having a place to store their supplies and their carbohydrates right on the sidelines and not having to travel to perform a diabetes care task. And just be sure that accommodations are put in place to ensure your child's safety on the field, on the court, and they should all be memorialized in your child's 504 plan.
Okay. Very important. Thank you. Rebecca, do you think I forgot about you?
I did not.
No. Well, good. Well, listen, what do you recommend? What actions can we take to prevent hypoglycemia or low blood sugars during activities and sports?
Well, this is such an important question because we want kids to feel safe and confident participating in sports without worrying about those lows. The real big thing to remember is that activity affects every child differently. So checking glucose before, during, and after can really help. There's not really good numbers or bad numbers. It's just information that we need to prevent lows, catch them early, and then treat them quickly when we need to. It's also important that the school nurse, the PE teacher, or the coach knows the child's diabetes plan. That includes the target range, what steps to take. Another important consideration that's sometimes overlooked is insulin timing. Rapid-acting insulin is often strongest 1 to 2 hours after a dose. So kids may really need some extra planning if sports happen during that window. And I believe we're going to share an ADA resource in the chat that can give you some more helpful tips for athletes and families.
Okay, well, that's helpful. But that's not always the case, though, right? Sometimes blood sugars go up during sporting activities. Why would that be, and how can you prevent that?
Yeah, I'm really glad this question came up because it surprises a lot of people. We expect activity to bring glucose down, and many times it does, but that's especially true with steady aerobic activities like walking, running, swimming, or biking. But with those short bursts of intense activity, we call those anaerobic or high intensity activity, blood sugar can actually go up. So you might see blood sugar rise with things like sprinting or weightlifting or interval training and some of our competitive sports. Also, stress, excitement, and nerves that go along with those can affect blood sugars too. So a high blood sugar during activity doesn't necessarily mean that anything went wrong. It just reminds us that each student's plan needs to be based on their own patterns. And that may mean adjusting the plan for different types of activities depending on what that student needs.
I've seen some people, competition versus training will do different because you mentioned the stress, and all of a sudden you're in a competition and not just training. Can your glucose do something different?
Of course, yeah, glucose can definitely behave differently during practice compared to competition, in part because practices can vary a lot. Some days are longer and steady, while others include sprints and intervals or resistance training. Games, as you mentioned, can also add another layer because of that adrenaline and excitement and nerves. They all push that glucose sometimes higher, as I mentioned. So the same child may need different strategies on different days. So the real key is to look for patterns over time and then work with the diabetes care team to decide what approach might mean the most sense for that child, that sport, or that situation.
Okay. Well, I'll ask you and Dr. Elchuri next question. That is pumps. So how do you decide? Do you take a pump off during activity? Do you leave it on? More and more people are using these AID systems. So how do you make that decision?
Yeah, so I'll go first. My short answer is if it's safe and practical, most students should really keep their pump on during most school activities. But for activities that are under about 1 to 2 hours, some students might consider suspending or disconnecting the pump. But that decision really needs to be planned ahead of time with the family and the diabetes care team. The reason is that the pump provides basal insulin. So being off that pump too long can increase the risk for rising glucose, or rising ketones, or even diabetic ketoacidosis, or something called DKA. So whatever the plan is decided, families and school staff should be clear on when that pump will stay on, when it may be suspended or disconnected, and then what extra steps might be needed to prevent high blood sugars, ketones, or very specific system risks. So I believe we're going to also share a link in the chat on some downloadable exercise guides that are available through Inspire T1D. And that's a global initiative focused on helping people with type 1 diabetes exercise safely.
Great. Dr. Elchuri, what do you tell your patients?
Yeah, I completely agree with Rebecca. So in most cases, students should keep their insulin pump on during school activities, including PE, because it provides that continuous insulin delivery. And the decision to remove it really should depend on the activity itself, the risk of dislodgement or damage to the device, and the student's individual diabetes management plan. And I agree that I wouldn't recommend disconnecting for more than 1 to 2 hours for the risk of developing ketones and going into DKA. And families, as was mentioned previously, should discuss sports or activity specific recommendations with their diabetes care team. And those instructions should be documented in the student's diabetes medical management plan and also discussed with the 504 plan.
Yeah, because my understanding is that it is better in most of these AIDs, automated insulin delivery systems, to turn on an exercise mode of some sort before exercise, not at the time it starts. Is that correct? And how do you
I
make
would
sure that
say
happens?
about half hour to 1 hour before.
Okay.
Yeah.
So got a little bit of timing goes into that as well. And planning, once again, like we've talked about so much. So Dr. Elchuri, follow up. What if, let me give you a specific case. If you had a student, their blood sugar was high, they're feeling fine. What kind of actions can be taken to make sure that they're not held out of, let's say, basketball or baseball practice?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. And we face this often. So a high blood sugar alone doesn't automatically warrant exclusion from basketball or baseball practice if the student is feeling fine. And so based on what their blood sugar is, there might be recommendations in their medical plan specifically to check for ketones and then receive a correction dose if indicated and to stay well hydrated. Usually if ketones are negative or trace or small and the student feels well, they can usually participate. However, if they have moderate or large ketones, if they're vomiting or they're feeling unwell, then those are reasons to postpone exercise until the blood sugar and the ketones improve. And this is where the diabetes medical management plan, as has been discussed previously, can really provide clear guidance. So the students can avoid being unnecessarily kept out of physical activity and sports.
Okay. And back to you exercise experts here. So parents can't be at every practice, every game. So, and what support is the school responsible for providing if that's the case?
Well, this is a very common concern, especially for younger students or those newer to diabetes. You want to know that your child's going to be safe and supported when you can't be there. And a 504 plan that's been talked about today really can put that support in writing. The key is to share those concerns early so the school can plan around that student's specific needs. And the DMMP and the 504 should include what support's needed, who will provide it, what to do if concerns come up, and trained staff should be available to provide that diabetes care listed in the plan. And coaches and PE teachers should also know how to recognize and treat low blood sugars. Supplies like a meter, fast-acting carbs, and water should be easy to access. And for students who use a CGM, as was mentioned, remote monitoring can also be a really helpful tool depending on the student's age and their needs. And ADA also has another additional guidance tool on CGM use at school that we can share in the chat for those.
Okay. So, well, and another piece of exercise is nutrition. So, Dr. McManus, what about nutrition with all this exercise? We've talked about devices and checking glucoses, but what do you recommend?
Yeah, absolutely. Food and nutrition definitely plays an important role with exercise, with managing blood sugars during the activity, fueling your child's body during the exercise, and also supporting the recovery afterwards. Um, and it's really important, though, to keep in mind that managing your child's blood sugar during activity usually takes a lot of trial and error, really to figure out what works best for your child. But there are some kind of general nutrition guidelines that you can use as a starting point, kind of a baseline, and then work off from that and make tweaks depending on how your child responds. So, generally speaking, we say that if your child's blood sugar is less than 80 before activity, the first thing you want to do is to treat that low. We generally say with about 30 grams of fast acting carbs, and then wait that 15 minutes, see before they exercise, let their blood sugar come up, hopefully, and then retest to see if some additional carbs might be needed at that time. If your child's blood sugar is really between 80 and 150 before exercising, typically they're likely to benefit from eating anywhere from roughly like 15 to 30 grams of carbs really immediately before exercising. We don't need or really want to do it that 15 minutes beforehand because we don't need time to allow those carbs to start kicking in since your child's already at kind of within a healthy range. The one exception here, though, is if your child is going to be exercising for less than 30 minutes, it's unlikely that it would really drop your child's blood sugar too dramatically. So you might not need those additional grams of carbs beforehand for that. Or if they're going to be doing that high intensity exercise, because like Rebecca had mentioned, these types of exercise actually tend to drive up our blood sugars. So extra carbs aren't typically needed or even recommended in those two situations. If your child's going to be exercising and physically active for an extended amount of time, so let's say for like more than an hour, typically it's really likely that they are going to need some additional carbs on top of kind of the general guidelines that I just had mentioned, not only to prevent them from having a low blood sugar during the activity, but also just to maintain their energy and keep their energy up while they're either competitively performing or just outside at the playground enjoying. So if your child's blood sugar though is on a little bit on the higher side before they're physically active, so let's say between like 150 and to 250. Typically, consuming carbs beforehand is not recommended, but in these instances, really monitoring their blood sugar while they're exercising is important. And if you see it start to dip and drop to less than 150, typically we kind of use that as a guideline, generally speaking, that they may need some additional carbs, just a small amount, usually 15 grams or so, can really help them I should say like prevent them from actually dropping and having hypoglycemia while they're exercising. And again, keep in mind, these are just general nutrition guidelines. It's really important to work with your care team and work with your child really to figure out how they respond best.
Okay. Well, listen, I know we're over. We're going to keep going. We have one more really important question about medical devices, and I want to ask that, but I want to just let everybody know in case somebody has to drop here at the top of the hour that we are going to answer the questions, but that'll be by email. So just keep an eye on your inbox, watch your spam, but we're going to be answering those and getting back to everybody because this is really, really important topics. So we want to make sure we answer your questions as well. So be patient with us as we work through those, but you will get a response. So now off to really to the last question. And Jackie, why don't I go back to you? It's been a little while. So let's talk about managing device usage. We've talked so much about collaborating, working together. and communicating. What are some of the best ways for parents and schools and children, this is really a tripod, right, to communicate about their devices, what's going on with their glucoses, and et cetera?
Yeah, this is a good question. I think one of the important themes we've been talking about throughout this webinar this evening is about being collaborative. So one of the most effective communication methods is a collaborative one. And there's not going to be just one certain type of communication, whether it's by phone, by email, that works for every family or every student. So I think the first step is establishing a clear plan of communication at the beginning of the school year. So meeting with the diabetes care team at the school to kind of outline what that is going to look like. The diabetes medical management plan provides that foundation for the partnership by outlining the student care needs and responsibilities. And then from there, the school nurse and family should discuss how they'll communicate any important updates, any concerns that they have, or any changes throughout the year. So this may include, like we had talked about before, parent phone calls, sending secure emails, using maybe the school's secure messaging system that they may have, or other tools that are available within the school. And it should focus on the information that's most meaningful for supporting the student in school. So that would include patterns in blood glucose levels. So if there's been a pattern of a high or patterns of lows, any significant highs or lows that occur during the school day. So in our district, anytime a student experiences a high that's typically above 250 or 300, they receive a phone call just reporting that occurred. Or if it's less than 70, they'll receive a phone call. But again, that can be something that's discussed. Maybe email is better because you work in a SCIF, particularly in Northern Virginia. We have a lot of families that work for the Pentagon. So those type of conversations, we need to have those type of conversations so we understand how best to communicate. And then it's important to remember that it is a two-way street, right? So we also need to hear back from the families with what any important changes. If they just saw the doctor, what changed? Anything that we need to do differently in the school day. And so this type of communication helps us identify concerns early and allows the team to make adjustments before, a small issue becomes something bigger. And then as the student gets older, communication should also include them when appropriate. So supporting students in becoming an active participant in their diabetes care really helps build that independence and self-advocacy skills for that student. So ultimately, to sum up, the goal isn't to communicate every single glucose reading or every single routine glucose task, but to ensure that the family and the school have the information that they need to provide care throughout the school day that's safe for the student.
Yeah, really important.
Mm-hmm.
So let's wind up here with one last question. And then, Crystal, this is really important. Cell phones in the classroom. So what can we do to make sure that our children have access to those while at school? I know some states are trying to pass laws against that, et cetera. So what can we do and how do we advocate for our children?
Oh, great. I'm really glad you asked that question. So all of the states have passed some form of cell phone restriction at school. Those restrictions vary. Most of the state laws contain an exemption to enable the kids to have access to their smart device to manage a medical condition such as diabetes. But even for those states having that exemption, the ADA's recommendation is to write the access into the child's 504 plan. So even though there may not be a restriction that is relevant or applicable to the student with diabetes, still write cell phone access into the 504 plan. So that's what I recommend that you do. And then I just want to say, one more recommendation. At ADA, we offer a free service. You can call 1-800-DIABETES. If your child is experiencing a particular school diabetes management challenge, Not only can we provide you with guidance and information and next steps, but we use the information provided to track trends and to try to identify what the prevalent problems are and where they're occurring. And that's how we allocate our resources and decide, what we're going to be focused upon. So give us a call. We're here to help. We're here to listen. We're here to brainstorm. And also, we're here to be on the front lines and to work on those problems that are truly impacting students with diabetes and to resolve them and to make for a safer and healthier school environment and a very successful school year ahead.
Yeah. So last comment was a shout out to Dr. McManus for breakfast for dinner. Excuse me, a dinner for breakfast. So I'm so used to saying the other. But I'm going to give a shout out to everybody. This was amazing. You all are incredible experts, and thank you for your input. But once again, I want to make sure everybody knows we are going to get back to you with answering your questions. I think it's really important. We could probably do a 1 hour or probably 2 or 3 hour seminar just answering everybody's questions that they have. And maybe we'll think about that in the future. But please, even they won't hear it, we'll give them a round of applause. What a great group of ladies. So have a wonderful evening. Sorry we went over, but I think it was definitely well worth it.
Thank you.
All right. Have a good evening, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.